Welcome to the Persistence U podcast with Lizbeth. That's you as in university, but we're really much more of a community here. Lizbeth Meredith is an author, speaker, and online teacher. Each week she'll be delivering amazing stories from survivors and strivers, all threaded together with a dose of persistence. We're so glad you're listening.
Debbie Russell and Kate Colbert, thank you so very much for being contributors to Unmapped and for being here tonight. I really love chatting with the two of you. None of us who've actually ever met in person, so that's super fun.
That's cool.
Yes, it really is. I love it because I feel like when a person participates in an anthology, one of the benefits can be that they develop. Well, that's how I got my cover artist who did a beautiful job was we're both in the same anthology called Not Marriage Material. So we both outed ourselves as being horrible partners. And in that way, we're like, wait, we've got a lot in common. You should do my book cover. So
Awesome.
yeah, it's really fun. But can I just ask you, and maybe Debbie, I'll ask you first and come back to Kate. Tell me about how you selected your wonderful story for Unmapped. And I only have a proof copy. I don't have a other one right now because I gave mine away. Yes, beautiful. For those on YouTube, you can see it. So
I have mine. So it's kind of funny because, of course, I've known you since I wrote my first book, and you were gracious enough to give me a very lovely blurb. But when you put the call out for submissions, I was thinking to myself that, at least for me personally, solo travel has always been exciting. I've always been struck by wanderlust. I've always been single. And so I started to think about it in the context of what you were looking for. And I thought, well, I don't know. I've just had a great time on all my trips and it's really been great. But then I did start to think about, especially when you were talking about concepts of resilience and courage and perseverance. And it made me think about how just 2 years ago, at the ripe old age of 58, 59, I decided I wanted to be a camper. And part of it was leaving my old job, so being self-employed and having the flexibility to travel whenever I wanted to, also having dogs, and really not wanting to leave them behind, wanting to share my experiences with them. I've always loved a good road trip. And so friends of mine who were partnered up were great campers. And it's really interesting. My only experiences with heterosexual couples, but it seems like the tasks are very divided around camping, where the man does the hitching and the unhitching and the dumping of the sewer and all the things, and the woman makes the meals, and makes sure everything's all clean and all of that. So as a singleton, I kind of realized that if I was going to take on this camping life, I was going to have to do all of it and be strong enough physically and learn a whole bunch of new things. And so as I considered whether or not I might have a story for you, I started to think about the whole experience that I had getting the camper, deciding that I was going to take this big plunge. So that's how the story came to be.
I love that. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that because I feel like I can travel a lot of different places and have by myself. But when I think about camping and doing what you mentioned, getting a flat tire maybe when I'm somewhere or dumping the sewer, I suppose I could get used to that. But it's the other stuff where I'm like, that sounds terrifying. But I am so impressed and I really enjoyed that. I think that one of my daughters is very interested in having a camper and learning those skills. So it was empowering even to read. And I like that so much. How about you, Kate? How did you know the story you would land on when I did the call for entries?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of traveling, and in my career, I've done a lot of traveling alone to some interesting places. And there it was really clear to me that while there are interesting stories from different places I've been and things that have happened to me, it was sort of, I knew that my solo traveling experience, it was sort of one of those things where the like whole was greater than the sum of its parts. And so how did I tell a story that was about sort of all of it, about the mindset shift? And you and I had been talking, and you had said that, what you were really fascinated about is when somebody starts traveling solo, what is it that shifts for them emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and I thought, well, gosh, for me, the whole thing was a shift. And what I mean by that is I was raised and my world was pretty small when I was a kid. I grew up in a suburb on a lake, and we basically just were always, swimming and on boats and paddle boats and ski boats and whatever else. And so we were just always in the water, stepping on broken glass and getting tangled in seaweed and whatever else. And our lives were pretty small. And I had a lot of friends, and my life was pretty simple. And I grew up with parents who didn't travel. We didn't go on vacations. We didn't really go anywhere. We went to my grandma's house, which was, 3 miles down the road. And that was probably, kind of as far as we went. And we really did live kind of like in a 5-mile radius for my whole life. I really didn't know what was out there. And my brother and I had occasion to go to Florida to visit my grandparents. My grandparents were in Florida when I was in high school, and we traveled by ourselves. I was 14 and my brother was 17. And my brother and I were very, very scared. And the idea of, and this is of course back in the day where there's no digital version of anything. If you lost your ticket, you were not getting on the plane, right? And so the boarding passes were really critical. And we, to this day, all these years later, 40 years later, we're still joking around about, do you have the boarding passes? Do you have the boarding passes? Who has the boarding passes? Because we would check. I had them in this little plastic caboodle with my little makeup kit, and they were inside there. And my brother would ask me to check like every 15 minutes, even though we hadn't moved from where we were sitting at the airport or where we were on a plane. And we were so afraid we were going to miss our connecting flight. And, we were kids who had never been in a big crowd. And the idea of going to O'Hare Airport, Atlanta, or these massive busy airports was really very, very scary for us. And so for me, there was a lot of fear around travel, and there was a lot of fear around leaving home and what could happen. And is the world big and scary? And we were raised to kind of believe that it was. And I ended up having a really unique experience in my early career. I started out as an English professor, and then very quickly realized, for all the ways in which I loved teaching young adults how to write, I didn't love it as much as I loved writing. And so I went into a journalism role pretty quickly, and I became a reporter and an editor for a high-tech magazine. If you're pairing your earbuds while you're listening to this interview, you're welcome. I'm the journalist who broke the story on the invention of Bluetooth. But in that job in my late 20s, I was given an opportunity to have to start traveling because I was covering the semiconductor industry. So I lived in Illinois in the Chicago area, and I needed to be in Silicon Valley all the time. And I didn't know how to get on an airplane by myself. I had no idea how to fly standby. I didn't know how to buckle the seatbelt. I knew nothing. But my first year in that job, I took 29 business trips. And so I went from, it was just immersion therapy. I went from terrified to travel to realizing, oh my gosh, there's freedom in this. And I was in a first marriage that was sort of young and ill-advised, and with a husband who really kind of wanted to control me. And I didn't get my driver's license till I was 25. And it was an opportunity to make my own decisions about what I was going to eat, whether I was going to eat, where I was going to go, how I was going to dress, where I was going to sit. And the whole world just opened up to me in this beautiful way that really cracked me wide open and helped me understand who I am, what I stand for, what I value, what I care about, what makes me laugh. And it was just a really amazing experience. So I decided to write a chapter called Long Beach, Long Time Coming, because my first big business trip was to Long Beach, California. And to really talk about what that shift was for me internally, to realize that being alone and out there in the world not only wasn't scary or lonely, it was liberating, and it was full of freedom and opportunity. And I am who I am today because of making that discovery.
That's huge. That really is huge. I love that. And I feel like the freedom for anyone to be able to say, I chose this meal. I chose to skip a meal. I chose this destination, or even if we didn't, for a work trip. I am somewhere different and I can get to know different people.
Yeah.
I have found so often people will say to me, like, you travel alone, did you get really lonely? And they're sure sometimes, but mostly people are more likely to approach you, whether you're in your own city, state, country, or in the world. They're more likely to connect with you if you make yourself, if you smile, look around and make yourself open. And we don't do that when we're with other people.
Agreed.
So it is, it's liberating, it's freeing, it's all of those things. Did you find that to be true also, Debbie, when you were, even as you've been camping, that you've met other people when you wanted to?
And it was absolutely. I am somebody who I love being by myself, but I also like interacting with friendly people. And campers are very friendly and sometimes a little too friendly. You know, they see a woman doing anything and all of a sudden, oh, do you need some help with that? And, you know, sort of like, I'll ask if I need it. So I've had to kind of I've had to navigate that a little bit again. But it just the sense of freedom and then the sense of confidence that comes with backing into a tight space or just, you know, pumping my water and you know, doing all the things. It the boost to my own, you know, sense, my value, my self-worth, all of that just, and I do think I'm keeping the aging brain active and occupied as I learn new things.
I think that is fantastic. And Kate, how is it like now? Have you ever chosen just to go someplace on your own that was awesome? You know,
Yeah. Yeah. So a few years ago, really at the height of the pandemic. So I was very, very sick at the beginning of the pandemic. I had contracted COVID the week that the pandemic was declared. So the second week of March 2020. And I have really serious underlying health issues. And so my body did not handle it well. And so I was in medical isolation for 68 days. And we had to actually sign over all the financials for my companies to my husband in the midst of it because my doctors did not think I was going to survive that. And I did survive it. And I came out of it pretty sick and impaired. And there have been a lot of surgeries and stuff as a result. But in the midst of it all, sort of once we finally got to a place where people were getting vaccinated, and I thought, I'm stir crazy. Like I've been stuck in my house for a year, you know, a year later. And so I think I can't remember if it was before or after vaccination, but somewhere around the Christmas holiday, either 2020 or 2021, I thought I need to get out of here. And interestingly, I was writing something. I was working on something that I was writing under a pen name. And I thought, I'm just going to go away. And so I live in Southeast Wisconsin, and we have this lovely town in Wisconsin called Kohler. And it really is owned by Kohler, like the water faucet company, the plumbing fixture company. And they have a beautiful design center where you can go shop for your next toilet or bathtub. And they have the only 5-star resort in the Midwest. The American Club is in Kohler, Wisconsin. And it's just phenomenal place. And there's a glass greenhouse that's been turned into a coffee shop, and they were playing Christmas music. And I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get there, but I'm just going to go drive up there. It's only a few hours from my house. And I'm just going to go to the spa with a mask. They made, you know, you had to be able to mask in the hot tub and whatever. It was kind of strange. And I'm just going to be me for a few days. I'm going to eat fancy meals, and I'm going to go to the spa, and I'm going to get a massage, and I'm going to write, and I'm going to read, and I'm going to go to bed whenever I feel like it. And it was a really beautiful, I was only there for 2 nights, and it felt like I was there for 10 because I felt so immersed in the experience. I did really great writing and reading, and I really was able to relax. And that was just a really fun, sort of safe way. And it was only a few hours from home and didn't even require getting on an airplane. And it was really fun. And it was fun to tell my husband, like, I'm just going to go have some me time. Like, I'm going to go kind of spa weekend myself. And it was lovely. I sat in front of fireplaces and read books. And I just basically tried to imagine, if I was a Hallmark Christmas movie, like, what would I be doing right now? And it was exactly those types of things, sitting in front of fireplaces with books. And it was just lovely. And so I've tried to do more of that. And something I mentioned in the chapter for Unmapped is that I don't travel alone a lot anymore because of some really serious health challenges, but I still carry a solo traveler's heart. So when my husband and I travel, I am always on a side quest. Like I'm always, and we have very different personalities. And so, he'll be like, he's had enough of all the people and on a cruise ship or something. And so he'll be back down in our cabin watching TV or playing on his phone or something. And I'll be like, oh, I'm going to be at the piano bar requesting songs, or I'm going to be,
Yeah.
and to Debbie's point, off, meeting new people and striking up conversations with strangers. And so I really feel like once you get really confident with that solo traveling, it just becomes part of who you are and part of the way that you live. And by the way, you don't have to leave. Like, you can go to your local farmer's market and strike up conversations with a bunch of strangers and make a bunch of great, really new friends without even having to go anywhere if you have the right mindset about it, I think.
Correct. I love that because not everyone can afford a trip some distant town, a hotel, especially right now, somewhere different. And yet taking those baby steps is a really big deal. I remember the first time I went to and I did write about this in Unmapped, but the first time I went to a movie theater by myself, a big old movie theater that I still go to every week, like clockwork. I can't even tell you I'm going tonight. But I was a teenager, but it was so terrifying. It was so terrifying for me. I wasn't raised to think that that was appropriate necessarily. I'm older, different generation, different family roots, all of that. It just didn't seem like that was okay to do. It was almost like going to a bar alone. Like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. And so when I realized that I could do that little thing and the world didn't end, that it opened something just a little. But when I took my first major trip as a middle-aged, not very wealthy woman and went to, let's say, Laos and Vietnam from Alaska, it was like, the people you meet, the person you find inside you. And I think that's huge. Debbie, you talked about also wanting to be adjacent with people, which is huge for me as a person also who's single, who lives alone. I don't always want to be interacting with people, but I will find every day I need to be around people. I like people, just in small doses. So how has your camping experience sort of helped and also just mining some of your qualities in Unmapped in your writing, the things that you've looked at and hearkened upon, how has that changed your worldview about whether it's safe or whether it isn't to be a solo woman traveler?
That's a really good question. And I belong to a Facebook group of solo women RV travelers, campers. And it's interesting reading the posts because I do think we are all on a continuum around safety and security. And I am probably to my own detriment, I refuse to feel unsafe. It's a weird thing. I think it comes from, being single for most of my life. I had a boyfriend for about 4 years, but I don't know. I've had experiences where I've just, in the moment, I've just had to, step up and be courageous. And I think that viewing people as threats, it can be so debilitating. And it's interesting. I don't consider myself an extrovert because interacting with people exhausts me, actually. But what I can say is I enjoy it for the short amount of time. And then I'm going to go in my camper, I'm going to shut the door, and I'm going to put a show on, and I'm going to, because I don't want to sit out there and have people, wanting to talk to me because she's sitting there all by herself. And no, I actually want to be by myself. And campgrounds are super tight. I mean, you are really right on top of each other. But what I learned early on is the design of the campers. Everybody's front door is on one side of the camper. So when you're lined up, my front door is facing the backyard of my neighbors. And depending how everybody, if they play by the rules and be where they're supposed to be, we can all enjoy our tiny little space. And that's what I like. And of course, having dogs is a whole other, it adds a layer to it because not everybody manages their own dogs appropriately. And so you've got to look out for all of that. But it's cool because I feel secure and yet I'm by myself, and I can't allow. I just don't. I don't know if it's compartmentalization or what it is, but I just refuse to sort of. What if somebody, it's not going to be the horror movie with the guy with the axe coming through the door. I mean, I'm just not going to go there.
Which
That's
is pretty
what it is.
amazing because I saw you on the ID channel in a documentary because you were a prosecutor. And so it's not like you haven't seen that sometimes things end very, very badly. And I do just want to say, like, it's so interesting. I'm glad you made a decision because what are we supposed to do? Wait under our bed for that to happen? No, it could. I want to acknowledge that solo travel is not always safe. And the other part of that is it's more likely that women at home are at risk for being injured if they are in an intimate relationship. And so that was a big part of why I wanted to donate funds to the Y. Like you, I compartmentalize, but unlike you, I don't think I ever feel fully safe ever. But that's okay. I'm fine with that. That's just how my life has been. And I am detached enough that I don't deeply care so much about it continuing on and on and on. But I will say that, we do what we can only plan what we can. We have to find joy. We have to find adventure. We have to find new connections. And most of the time, if we use good discretion, if we, and plan, things turn out nicely. And if they don't, I would still rather be somebody who was open to new experiences, new people, and didn't live life underneath my bed. And I love that. I love that you said that. And Kate, also, you've come across, you've done different work in justice system and volunteering and many, many things. And so when you think about solo travel or you think about as a intimate partner violence, how do you think about, did you think like, the weirdo, why is she donating to the YWCA? What is the nexus there? Or did it seem pretty?
No, it made a lot of sense to me. I've served on the board of a domestic violence shelter and I've been a foster parent. And so I've seen difficult things and people going through really difficult moments and, violence and abuse and neglect. And you're absolutely right. I think that sometimes, whether it's our parents or society or our own inner voice, I think we sometimes are lied to about safety and lack thereof. And we are told, stay home, the world is safe at home, when we know that the home is sometimes the least safe place on earth. Or don't go out there and try new things, the world is scary. What if people laugh at you? What if you screw up? What if you say the wrong thing? What if you do the wrong thing? What if people look at you funny when you go to the movie theater by yourself or eat at that fancy restaurant while you're, reading a book and get a table for one? And for me, I was raised to believe the world was unsafe. And it was a startling revelation for me to discover that in so many ways, the world was really beautiful. I remember being on a street corner in Charleston, South Carolina, trying to find this like trolley to like get somewhere. And I had no idea where this bus was supposed to be stopping. I'm like looking around and some woman who was like clearly like rushing to get to work. She was walking and she was like speed walking and she was in business clothes and she just stops dead. And she's like, can I help you find something? And she just like, because clearly I like didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. And the world is just full of people who will stop and help you if you, raise your hand or look a little forlorn or whatever. And it is my experience that, you'd be smart about where you go after dark. And, but the world really is just beautiful. One of my favorite moments ever was this, like, we're recording this sort of, right after the World Series, and not a big baseball fan, but one of my largest clients is based in Boston. And I was in a hotel room in Boston when the Red Sox won the World Series several years ago, one of the many times they won. And I was in my hotel room and I could hear people on the streets like screaming and honking and hooting and hollering. And I thought, I want to be part of that. And so I literally grabbed my room key and my driver's license and shoved it in my pocket, grabbed a jacket, and I just went running out of the hotel. And I came downstairs and a homeless man just hugged me as I came running out. And he's like, we won. And people were spilling out of the bars and people were on each other's shoulders and people were like hitting the street signs and honking their horns. And I remember saying, so this is, I'm like, I'm from Chicago. We're never going to win. And people were like, someday you might. And of course we did, the Cubs. And I felt like part of this amazing thing that was happening. And I was not a Bostonian, but I was able to, for a moment, to be part of what was happening in their city. But I could have kept my shoes off and stayed in my hotel room. But I decided I'm going to go outside and see what's going on. And I want to be part of this energy. And I think for me, that's what travel is about, whether it's trying to harness a calm energy, a peaceful, something healing, or being part of something big and exciting and adventurous and seeing new things. But it's about saying, I can only create certain types of energy when I'm at home alone. But if I go out into the world, I can sort of paint with different colors, and I can become I can jump into different types of energy and create different types of energies that are not available to me at home. So I love my house. I love my home. I love my husband. I love my 3 dogs. But for me, travel is my therapy. I have a t-shirt that says that. And there is just, people say to me like, oh gosh, but why go through all the trouble of getting out? Because life is in the living and the world is out there. And I'm convinced it's not in here.
Right. I definitely can appreciate that. What do you think, Debbie? Do you agree?
100%. 100%.
We choose. We do choose. We have to choose, or we won't have it. Our resilience. Not everyone is resilient, but not everyone pursues it. Not everyone pursues healing. Not everyone pursues even things like adventure. But I don't think of resilience as just going through something hard and awful and making it through. I really do believe that when we learn to prioritize ourselves sometimes, and when we choose something that we've wanted to do, it's not selfish. It can be a beautiful thing that has a trickle effect for the people around us, and we can grow our community. I remember the first time when I went by myself to Laos and Vietnam, I met a number of people, most of whom were from Australia, Melbourne, on that particular trip, but I stayed in touch with them. And then I went to Italy and France, I think my next solo trip. Stayed in youth hostels. I was like in my 40s, then 50s, super old. When I got to my 50s, I went to Australia and I got to see them all these friends that I was still in touch with. And so it's amazing, the incredible people that really are out there in the world. And, they're not all bad. There are some scary people in the world. I don't want to minimize that. The book has been dedicated to a couple of people, but one of them was someone I met in a Facebook group, an author. And I won't say her name because frankly, people can get the book and figure it out. But I dedicated it to her because she had a provincial life that she hated in the United Kingdom. She hated it. And she blew it up and moved to the Dominican Republic. She fell in love with a local person, married him eventually, put him through law school, put him through a mayoral campaign, helped raise his children. So excited, fluent in the language. She traveled all over the world, but then she found her roots. And then she was murdered at home by the very people, yes. And a couple of years ago, he was acquitted, as were the relatives who participated. I think if she could do it over, knowing what I knew of her back when I did, she would still travel. She would still love with her whole heart, but she would be more attuned to the red flags that happened at home. And there really were no shortage. But it was something that I just thought, that punctuates the point. We can meet great people, but we must always be cognizant of who we let in our lives closely and never get too comfortable or overlook things because we needed to be with someone. And I think solo travel has made me feel a lot more whole. I feel like it has for both of you as well. Even Kate, as you said, you are married, but you still will find pockets of solo. And there are other contributors who found the same. We don't have to be alone all the time when we travel, but finding that moment, that excursion, that afternoon.
Yeah.
Love it.
Well, and by the way, this is a strange thing, but for those of us who live with someone, when the other person travels and then you get the house to yourself, that's also its own adventure. So my husband is about to go on a business trip and he had asked, do I want to come with him to San Francisco? And I'm recovering from a surgery right now. And I thought, I don't know, I really want to sit in a hotel all day while he's at this conference. And I'm like, oh, so I'm planning all kinds of like get-togethers with my friends while he's gone. And like, I love fresh air, but my husband is like always closing the windows. So like I'm gonna be like bundled up like in winter gear with the windows open and stuff while he's gone. And so I have big plans for how I'm going to like solo like housekeep while he is gone. And so that's its own thing too. So
Amen. People don't have to travel far to have those moments. All right. Does anyone have any final thoughts? And let us wrap up. This has been such a joy.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for putting together this book and the opportunity that you gave all of us to participate. It's just such a beautiful book. I'm really proud of it, and I've been recommending it to lots of friends. I think it itself actually feels like a little respite and a trip. So for people who maybe can't get away this week or whatnot, curl up with it. It feels like going on a trip with all of these women and seeing the world through their eyes, which I thought was really quite beautiful. And so I thank you for doing this, and I hope the book is wildly successful for all the reasons.
I thank you. That just makes me feel so good because, as you know, publishing is stressful. And so I am so grateful. And Debbie, do you have any final words as well?
Oh, yes. I also am grateful to have been a part of it. And I just one little tidbit, because when you mentioned San Francisco, Kate, one of my very first travel adventures occurred when I think I was still in my 20s, and I went to visit my older great aunt and uncle who lived outside of San Francisco. And he was a New Zealander. He was very gruff. The family never cared much for him. And they lived in Marin County outside of San Francisco. And it was my expectation that they were going to accompany me into San Francisco to show me the sights. But to my surprise, my great uncle says, why would we go into the city? And I try to think back to how old they would have been at the time, probably in their 70s, maybe. But it was my first experience being in their home. And I decided I was just going to take the bus by myself from their place to San Francisco, had my first meal in a restaurant in Chinatown, actually went to a bar on Fisherman's Wharf and survived all of that, right? But I bring this up only because of what I believe is the great thing that you're doing with this book, Lizbeth, because being in their home and seeing the way he was treating her. We had also a different day gone over to Napa, and oh my gosh, he was just screaming at her in the car, and I was in the back seat. And I always got very traumatized by people yelling at each other. I know I'm a loud person and I can come off pretty intense, but there's a difference between being intense and screaming at somebody and being abusive. And I'll always remember that trip, because before I left, I got her aside and I just said, I hope he's not, I forget how I said it to her, but I just wanted to express my discomfort with how I felt she was being treated. And you never know what, sometimes it's only verbal, sometimes it's only emotional, whatever, but it's just interesting that those two things sort of tied into this particular trip where I just got thrown into San Francisco, and it was like, oh, I guess I'll make the best of it. And that's, again, the safety issue. I felt fine out there, but I felt really, really uncomfortable in their home with them. So anyway, I appreciate, as a former prosecutor of domestic violence cases, I really appreciate what you did with this project. And I was just so honored to be a part of it.
Oh, I'm so honored that you both chose. And I appreciate that you were both just so unflinching. Like, yes, I have many things to be doing right now. I will do this. And so thank you both. It's just amazing to connect again, but also that you would take your time, and time is a huge resource, and put it into this has just been a joy. So thank you very much. This was great today.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Thank you so much for listening. Now, to find out more, head on over to lameredith.com and be sure to hop on the mailing list too. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a rating and review or share with a friend. And if you really, really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you never miss another episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Persistence U with Lizbeth.